The A-10 Warthog was designed to survive the kind of fights that chew other aircraft apart. Its scarred frame, its violent scream, and that bone-shaking cannon have pulled countless soldiers back from the edge. And now, with the 2026 rebuild, this beast hits harder, hunts smarter, and refuses to back off from modern threats. So, what upgrades made this beast even deadlier?
How the Warthog became the infantry's favorite monster. Imagine soldiers taking fire, pinned in a street or a field, and they need a friendly aircraft that can show up fast, stay close, and hit the exact truck, bunker, or tank that is hurting them without flattening everything around it. That job needs a plane that flies low enough and slow enough for the pilot to see what is really happening and tell friend from enemy with human eyes, not just by staring at radar screens. For a long time, the United States tried to do that job with aircraft that were built for other roles. In the Vietnam War, a tough old propeller plane called the Douglas A-1 Sky Raider carried huge loads of bombs and rockets and could circle over a fight for hours, which made ground troops love it. But as North Vietnam filled the sky with heavier anti-aircraft guns and surface-to-air missiles, that big, slow aircraft became easier to hit, even though it had armor around the cockpit. Fast new jets like the F-4 Phantom were not the answer either. They were built for speed and high altitude. When they raced over the jungle at very high speed, it was hard for pilots to pick out a single truck under trees or a small team with a rocket launcher near friendly troops, and the risk of hitting the wrong target went up. While Vietnam taught those lessons, planners in Europe stared at maps of West Germany with dread. If the Cold War turned hot, Soviet tank columns could pour through terrain gaps like the Fulda and drive toward Western Europe. Stopping that steel flood needed more than high-altitude bombing. It needed an airplane that could tear up tank columns, protect friendly infantry, and operate all day from forward airstrips. Out of that mix of bad experiences and scary forecasts came a very clear idea. The Air Force did not just need another fast fighter that could also drop bombs. It needed a flying tank built from the ground up to protect people on the ground. That idea turned into a formal effort in the late 1960s called the AX program, short for Attack Experimental. The goal was to build a simple, tough, cheap-to-run jet that could take off from short, rough, even damaged runways, carry a heavy load of weapons, live through serious ground fire, and kill tanks for a living. Inside the Air Force and the Pentagon, a small group pushed hard for this kind of machine. They wanted an aircraft that mechanics could fix with basic tools at forward bases, one that pilots could fly low and slow without needing a room full of computers to keep it stable, and one that put money into armor and firepower instead of polished cockpit trim. It was not a glamorous vision, but it matched what troops in the mud actually needed. Several companies answered the call with designs. In the early 1970s, the competition came down to two prototypes, the Northrop YA-9 and the Fairchild Republic YA-10. Both were blunt-nosed, straight-winged attack jets built for low-level work, but the Fairchild design leaned even harder into the ugly, practical look that later earned it the nickname Warthog. On the YA-10, the two jet engines sat high on the back of the fuselage, with the twin tail surfaces partly hiding them. That odd layout helped keep the engines away from sand and rocks kicked up from rough fields, and also hid some of their hot exhaust from heat-seeking missiles. After a series of fly-offs and tests in the early 1970s, the Fairchild jet won and went forward into production as the A-10 Thunderbolt II. The wildest part of the design was not even the airframe, it was the gun. At the same time as the AX program, the United States was funding a huge rotary cannon called the GA-UA-8 Avenger. It's a 7-barrel gun that fires 30mm shells built to punch through the armor of modern tanks. The complete gun system, including the spinning barrel cluster and the ammunition drum, is about 19 feet long and weighs well over 4,000 pounds, roughly the same size as a small car. In fact, the gun and its drum make up close to 1/6 of the empty weight of the whole airplane. Because the weapon is so large and so central to the job, the design team basically built the airplane around it. The gun is mounted slightly to one side inside the nose, but the single barrel that actually fires when the pilot pulls the trigger sits exactly on the center line. That way, when the gun is firing, the recoil pushes straight back through the spine of the jet, instead of twisting it off target. That's why, if you look at an A-10 from the front, the nose wheel is oddly off to the right. It had to move out of the way of the gun. When the pilot fires, the GA-UA-8 can reach a rate of about 3,900 rounds per minute, though in combat the bursts are usually limited to a second or two. In that short burst, the gun fires dozens of shells, and tests show that about 8 out of 10 of them will land inside a 40-foot circle when the target is roughly 4,000 feet away. The ammunition built usually mixes armor-piercing rounds and high-explosive rounds. Armor-piercing shells use a very hard core to punch through several inches of steel plate at normal attack distances, and the explosive ones rip open thinner targets and set off fuel or ammo. Put together, the effect on a tank or armored vehicle caught in the open is brutal. But the A-10 was never only about what it could kill. It also had to survive flying into places where people on the ground were pointing guns and missiles straight at it. To give the pilot a real chance, Fairchild wrapped the cockpit in a heavy shell of titanium armor. This bathtub uses plates about 1.5 inches thick and weighs around 1,200 pounds in total. It's built to stop hits from high-explosive shells up to about 23 millimeters in size, the kind of heavy anti-aircraft fire that would tear most other jets apart. The rest of the body follows the same idea. Many key systems are doubled and routed along different paths so that one lucky hit doesn't knock everything out at once. The 2 jet engines are spaced apart, mounted high on the back of the aircraft, and separated from the tail and the wings. That spacing means a missile or shell blast that wrecks one engine is less likely to destroy the other at the same time.
The flight control system uses fluid-powered lines, but there are extra lines in different locations, and there is even a full mechanical backup mode. In that backup mode, the pilot can still move the main control surfaces with cables and pulleys if all the hydraulic fluid has leaked out. In both tests and real combat, A-10s have managed to keep flying and return to base with big sections of the tail, wing, or engine area blown away. Fuel is another weak spot on most aircraft, so the designers treated it with the same care. The main fuel tanks sit close to the center of the jet, away from the wingtips, and they're aligned with foam blocks that cut down the risk of fire or explosion if a shell punches through. The tanks can seal themselves to a degree after a puncture, and valves can shut off damaged sections to keep the remaining fuel from draining out. The way the A-10 flies also fits this close support job. Instead of thin, swept wings like a sleek fighter, it has big, straight wings with a large surface area and strong flaps that gives it a lot of lift at low speeds and lets it carry heavy weapon loads without needing a long, perfect runway. Its landing gear is tall and rugged with wide, low-pressure tires that can roll over bumps and loose stones on rough airstrips or even stretches of highway. Because the airframe is so stable, the pilot can fly slower and lower than most jets while still keeping good control. The Warthog can cruise over a battle area at speeds that give the person in the cockpit time to scan the ground with naked eyes, pick out hidden vehicles and gun positions, and line up cannon or bomb runs with care instead of guesswork. Even with the landing gear pulled up, part of the main wheel still sticks out below the body. That odd look is on purpose. If the pilot ever has to make a belly landing because the gear will not come down, those partly exposed wheels can take some of the first impact and help keep the main structure from tearing apart. All of these choices were in place before the A-10 ever fired a shot in combat, but the real test came in the early 1990s. The first big war for the Warthog was Operation Desert Storm in 1991, when a group of countries led by the United States moved to drive Iraqi forces out of Kuwait. In that short, intense air campaign, A-10 crews flew thousands of attack missions against Iraqi ground forces. The aircraft destroyed more than 900 Iraqi tanks, about 2,000 other military vehicles, and around 1,200 artillery pieces over the course of the war. They also shot down at least 2 Iraqi helicopters with cannon fire, which is a rare trick for a jet that was never meant to be a pure air-to-air fighter. The Warthog did not come through that war without scars. Several aircraft were hit by missiles or heavy guns, and a small number were shot down, but many others came back with damage that would have killed most jets, including holes in the wings, shredded tail sections, and missing panels. By the time the new century began, the A-10 had earned a hard reputation as a guardian for people on the ground and a nightmare for tank crews and convoy commanders. Its basic shape, its thick armor, and that huge cannon were all doing exactly what the original designers had hoped. But the world around it was changing. Inside the A-10 Super Upgrade. By the early 2000s, the Warthog had proven itself in combat, but it faced a new problem. Its armored body could take punishment, but inside the cockpit, pilots still flew with round dials, paper maps strapped to their legs, and targeting systems that depended on their own eyes. Against evolving threats, that was not enough. The Precision Engagement Program would transform the A-10A into the A-10C by dragging it into the digital age. 2 color screens replaced many gauges and tied into a digital moving map and a new weapons computer.
The layout added hands-on throttle and stick, or HOTUS, putting extra switches and thumb controls on the stick and throttle so the pilot could change weapons, move sensors, and mark locations without letting go of the main controls. For a jet that spends its life down low, that mix of screens and HOTUS was a huge step away from the paper map era. Those screens do more than look pretty. They pull flight data, fuel, and weapon status into one place and lay it over a live map. Friendly forces, target areas, and danger zones show up as clear symbols instead of scribbles. The weapons computer knows what hangs on each wing and tracks how much is left. All of that cuts workload and lets the pilot spend more time looking outside for threats and targets instead of hunting across a forest of dials. New brains need new eyes, so the next step was to bolt targeting pods, such as Sniper and Lightning, under the wings. Each pod is a long sensor package with a day camera, an infrared view that turns heat into a clear picture at night or through smoke, and a laser to mark targets. Before these pods, an A-10 pilot often had to dive in and visually search for trucks and gun teams with the naked eye, hoping to spot them through dust and trees. With pod video on the cockpit screens, the pilot can now scan from medium height, lock onto a small moving vehicle, and watch it in real time. The pod measures exact coordinates for that point on the ground and feeds them straight into the weapons computer. The way the A-10 talks to the rest of the force changed just as much. A key part of the makeover was the Situational Awareness Data Link, usually shortened to SADL. Air Force releases compare it to an internet-style network for jets and ground units. Each member sends small bursts of digital data and in return sees a shared map on their screens. Friendly units appear as blue symbols. Known or suspected enemy positions show up in other colors. The map updates again and again while the fight is still going on instead of being frozen at takeoff. Defense coverage also notes that Link 16, another data link used by many fighters and command aircraft, is being added so the HOG can plug into an even larger web of shared tracks and targets. Modern secure radios, and on some jets, satellite communication back this up, so the pilot can talk clearly with ground controllers and command posts without constant static and confusion. All of that information has to reach the pilot in a way that does not overwhelm them. That is where the helmet-mounted queuing system comes in. On the A-10C, many units use a system known as Scorpion. The helmet has a small, clear display in front of one eye. Symbols that used to live only on the main screens now float in the pilot's field of view, lined up with what they're seeing outside. If the pilot turns their head toward a suspicious truck or a flash from the ground, they can press a small switch and tell the targeting pod, "Look over there." The pod turns to that point, locks on, and the coordinates appear on the displays. If the jet's warning system senses a missile launch or radar lock, a bright cue on the helmet shows the direction, so the pilot can react with a turn or a burst of flares without hunting for the right gauge. Giving the HOG a new brain and new eyes would not mean much without sharper claws. One of the biggest changes in the 2000s was the full use of Joint Direct Attack munitions. Known everywhere as JDAM, this is not a brand new bomb, but a guidance kit that bolts onto the back of a normal freefall bomb and adds a small computer, steering fins, and a link to satellite navigation. With that kit attached, a bomb that used to be dropped by pure fuel becomes a smart weapon that can fly itself to a set of coordinates in almost any weather, instead of being blocked by clouds or smoke. For the A-10C, that means models such as the GBU-31, built around a 2,000-pound class warhead, and the GBU-38, built around a 500-pound class bomb, can be carried under the wings and guided to a point chosen by the pilot or by a ground controller. Once the coordinates are set, the jet can release the bomb from medium height and let the kit do the rest, steering itself into bunkers, artillery sites, or strong buildings, even through cloud and dust. Instead of making many gun runs in bad weather, the pilot can often do one clean pass and leave. The next step went even further. The small diameter bomb, known as the GBU-39, is a slim winged weapon in the 250-pound class. It uses a mix of satellite and internal guidance and can glide roughly 40 or more miles from the point where it is released. Because the bomb is lighter and slimmer, a single rack can carry 4 of them in the space where one large bomb used to hang. An A-10 fitted with new racks will be able to carry up to 16 small diameter bombs at once and assign each one to a different set of coordinates on a single flight. The digital brain also changed how classic missiles are used. The A-10 had already carried the M65 Maverick, a heavy missile built to kill tanks and bunkers. With a new cockpit, the Maverick's seeker picture can be shown in sharp detail on a color screen, and the targeting pod can mark precise aim points for it. The pilot can ripple several missiles in one run instead of treating each one as a separate job.
Short-range Sidewinder missiles carried on the tips of the wings also benefit from better warning systems and helmet cues, giving the Hog a better shot at defending itself against helicopters and slow drones than in the past. The upgrade that really fits the spirit of the Warthog, though, is the Advanced Precision Kill Weapons System, or APKWS. For decades, jets carried simple 2.75-inch rockets that flew in a straight line and exploded where they happened to land. They were useful but crude. APKWS is a small guidance section that slides between the rocket body and its warhead. It adds small fins and a seeker that can follow a reflected laser spot. When engineers and test pilots fired the weapon from an A-10 in early trials, several rockets hit within inches of the aim point, proving that even a light rocket could act like a tiny guided missile instead of a spray-and-pray tool. Because the guidance kit is added to rockets that the military already buys in large numbers, each shot is far cheaper than a big missile. Public briefings and tests have pointed out that an APKWS shot can cost a fraction of a high-end air-to-air missile while still knocking down small drones or striking light vehicles. You can hit a pickup truck, a gun position, or a small boat without blowing half a city block apart. For a slow, patient attack jet that often works close to friendly lines, that kind of fine control is valuable. All of these weapons and sensors ride on the same old heavy frame, so the Air Force had to make sure the airframe itself could last long. Original plans expected the A-10 to retire much earlier, but wars in the Middle East and other regions kept it busy long after its planned end date. By the 2000s, cracks and age were starting to show in the wings. To fix that, the Air Force hired Boeing to build new wing sets, sometimes called enhanced wing assemblies, for more than 170 jets. By 2019, the Air Force announced that re-winging on that main batch was complete and said the fresh metal and new fittings would help keep the Hog flying into the late 2030s if needed. Even while those hardware upgrades were happening, there was a constant argument in Washington about whether the A-10 should still be around at all. Air Force leaders at different times argued that money and manpower should shift to newer stealth jets and unmanned systems, and laid out plans to retire Hog squadrons over a period of several years. Lawmakers pushed back, pointing to the aircraft's unique role in close support and the trust it has built with ground forces. The defense bill for the 2026 budget year stops the service from cutting the Hog fleet below 103 aircraft. That floor means at least a core group of Warthogs must stay in service through the year unless a full replacement plan is offered and approved.